Hello everyone, I'm Soma Mazumdar.
And I'm Orod Semsarzadeh, and welcome to Kanban Lab podcast. In each episode, we'll pick a common question and dive into a different aspect of Kanban, exploring its principles, practices, and applications, and answering that question.
Our goal in this podcast is to demystify Kanban and help listeners understand how it can benefit their teams and organizations through addressing the common misconceptions, clarifying concepts, and answering questions about Kanban. Hey, Yara. Well, I was just thinking, what did you hear interesting about Kanban this week that we can talk about today?
Yeah, actually, I've had a very interesting conversation with one of my colleagues about the workflow. And he told me that why different team has different workflow and why we can't standardize the workflow. So I thought that might be an interesting topic to discuss about, what is workflow? Can we standardize it? That kind of thing.
Absolutely. This is something I have been experiencing a lot, I would say, in different organizations where they would like to standardize the workflow with, the standard 4 or 5 columns for all kind of teams.
Hmm.
And something based on my experience and understanding Kanban, I kept asking them that, okay, why? Why do you think it is a good idea to standardize workflow when different teams have different context, different services they offer? So what's your take on that?
So I'm actually want to talk about, let's imagine we have multiple team, they work on the same service or product,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And they still want to have different workflow.
Yeah.
So I would ask this question to
Mm-hmm.
start with.
Mm-hmm.
What is workflow in the first place? And then
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we can answer this question when we
Okay.
clarify the definition of workflow.
That's a really good start. Yes, we should start with what is workflow. So what I believe workflow is actually the different important stages that you have in the work that you are doing. So whenever you are trying to complete a service or deliver a service to your customer, the work will go through different stages.
Mm-hmm.
And any stage which takes more than around 2 hours to
Mm-hmm.
complete should be made visible because there is a potential that you can find, an improvement in there.
Mm-hmm.
So
So can we say, how work flow through the system called workflow?
yes, yes,
Yes?
that's the
Okay.
easiest definition.
Yeah. And that's why we call it workflow, right?
Yes.
So is that possible that we have two teams, for example, they work on the same product, right? They both produce software products, for example, right?
Yeah.
And they want to have different workflow. So why they want to have different workflow?
Um, the power of workflow is when, a group of people come together, that's a team, come
Mm,
together and mutually agree that what are the stages they want to make visible so that they can talk about improvement together.
mm-hmm,
So when you talk about that okay, if even if they are working on the same product, they want to have different workflow. And for me,
mm-hmm,
that is absolutely okay
mm-hmm,
because workflows are always based on the context. So in
mm-hmm,
this case, it's the context of the team, their understanding of the services they are providing, and their understanding of which stages they want to
mm-hmm,
visualize. So different team working on the same product can have different workflow.
mm-hmm. So I like to step back a little bit and ask everyone that first of all, what is the purpose of having workflow, right? So why do we need workflow in the first place? Right. So yes, how workflow through the system, but what is the benefit of having that? Right. So one of the reason we like to visualize the workflow is to see how many work we have in each stages, that kind of stuff, and also what we want to measure. So what we want to visualize
Yeah.
and what we want to measure, right? So based on these two, then we can design our workflow. So you mentioned that anything, for example, takes more than 2 hours, then we need to have a stage, right? So I would say maybe in one organization they say, okay, anything less than half an hour we don't want to measure, right? It's acceptable, doesn't matter. We don't need to have stages because having too much stages, it's not also beneficial
Yes.
necessarily, right?
Yeah.
So we need to balance.
Yeah.
So when we have multiple team, yes, the end result might be a software product, right? But they have different reason. They want to visualize different stages on the workflow and they want to measure different things,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And that's why you can't really standardize it. So let me give you an example, and it's a current example, right? So we have two teams. One team has one Java developer, for example, right? So this person write the code, but
Yeah.
there is no one in this team to review his code. Okay. So they
Yes.
want to measure how long this person is waiting or his work is waiting until someone else from another team come and review his code. Okay, it
Yes.
might be 1 day, 2 days. Right? Another team, they have two Java developers. One person write the code. When it's ready, just tap on the shoulder. Hey, Soma, can you review my code? And
Yes.
Soma say, okay, I'm in the middle of something, but I'll have a look. Yeah, maybe
Yeah.
1 hour later, 2 hours later, Soma had a look. Okay, this is good. This is good. Can you change this one? What is the purpose of this line? Stuff like that. They review together, and it's good. All right, the
Yes.
code
Yeah.
review stuff. So we don't need to necessarily visualize
The
separate
review.
stage for the code review because it happens
Yeah.
as part of the work, and it happens normally quick.
Yeah.
Again, another team has a CI/CD, right? So when the code is finished, they commit the code, push it, automatically deploy.
Yeah.
So they don't need to visualize the work for ready for deployment, that kind of thing. Another team doesn't have this, the luxury of automation. So they write the code, package it up, whatever they need to do, and then they need to wait for another team to deploy the code. So we want to measure how long, again, these works been waiting for another team. So,
Yes.
as I said, this is a current example and it's currently happening, right? So by adding this ready for deployment in our workflow, I identify that we've been waiting 20% of the entire lead time. We've been waiting for another team to deploy it. When I show the result and this stat to the managers, they surprised because they never visualize this. They never really
Yeah.
see
Yes.
this as a, waiting, right? So, okay, we
Yes.
have a fixed release cycle. Every Wednesday, for example, we deploy, right?
Yeah.
So when I show them, we have 20%, around 20% waiting time, they surprised and then they were like, okay, so now we need to do something about it,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So it's always about, what we want to visualize and what we want to measure. And based on that, we can design the workflow.
Yes. See, at the end, it's all about improving the system and
Mm-hmm.
making the flow better. So all these things we need to understand that it is always based on the context you are in. Again, when you
Mm-hmm.
say it like that, like, yes, what is your reason? What is your purpose? You need to understand that first. And also, we need to understand that when we start visualizing workflow, it's about making or improving our system better. So wherever we can, so that we can identify the delays in the system or the bottleneck, and
Mm-hmm.
then take necessary action. And
Yeah.
again, that's where the power of agreement comes there, like on the table, because when the team comes together and agree that these are the stages we want to visualize, then the conversation around the improvement becomes easier.
Mm.
So yes, it is true. So measurement is also like we want to measure things so that we can improve, we can find out where we are lacking or what is the delay so that we can get better. So yes,
Yeah.
exactly, I agree with you, and I really loved those two examples. I believe our audience will find it more relatable, and they can understand the whole situation we are trying to in a better way. So thank you for that.
So, if someone said, let's standardize the workflow,
Hmm.
right? Then what do you think we can tell to that person?
This is a really good one because I have experienced this so much in my career.
Mm,
So to give you an example or from my experience,
mm,
I was working for this real estate organization, and they were going through a digital transformation.
mm-hmm,
And one of the biggest initiative they had was around Jira tooling.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So they had people, from like who would know in and out of Jira. They could help the team to implement Jira. But one of the things the digital transformation officer wanted was standardized workflow
mm-hmm. Yes.
across the whole of digital.
Yeah.
And
That's actually good example. So do you know what was the reason behind that? Why that person wanted to standardize it?
so, yes, I
Mm-hmm,
actually do. So
mm-hmm,
the reason is that he wanted data or
mm-hmm,
information out of it, that how the whole division is doing.
mm-hmm,
So one thing that he failed to understand is that standardizing workflow is not going to give him the outcome that he's looking for. What he actually wanted
mm-hmm,
is that
mm-hmm.
a view where he can get the relevant data that would
Yeah.
help him to understand where the division is heading,
Mm-hmm,
how they are progressing. So that's
mm-hmm,
totally different, right? When people say they want standardized workflow, I
mm-hmm.
believe most of the time what they actually want is to how they are viewing the data.
Okay. So it's
And
easier for example, managers to
yes,
understand who is doing what and where the work stays and stuff like that. So they look at
yes,
10 different boards and easily they understand that, okay, this team spent 10 days on doing the work, another team spent, 5 days,
exactly.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
So, and that's, I think that's a, valid point or valid reason to
yep,
standardize it, right?
yeah.
So, what do you think they might miss by standardizing the workflow?
But they wouldn't be able to pinpoint the improvement, like where the improvement should happen, like in which stage to start
Mm,
with. Now, when you ask that, like standardized workflow, so let me just tell you,
mm-hmm,
I found a workaround that in the place I was working. So what I did is that I worked with the person who understood Jira very well and created a standardized view at the portfolio level so
mm-hmm.
that anyone who is, like
Yeah,
viewing the data at that
yeah,
level could
very
have a
high
view,
level.
very high level, could actually see that how work is progressing in their
Mm-hmm,
division. But underneath that, every team had their own, like
mm-hmm.
very customized
Yeah, so
workflow,
more
which
detailed.
suits exactly, which suits
Yeah,
their purpose, which suits
yeah.
their context. So what we kind of achieved both the things at the same time. So
Mm-hmm,
this is another thing I have learned from my
mm-hmm,
experience, that sometime when someone comes to you and asks about standardized workflow, maybe try and understand their purpose, why they are asking that.
mm-hmm.
Because if the reason is that it's just a like easier way to manage the data or understanding where teams are at, you can give them that without actually standardizing the team
Yeah,
and taking away, the empowerment from the team.
that's right.
But at the same time, you can actually show them the benefit of having
So give
customized
them
workflow.
basically the right amount of data that they need, right? So
Yes,
if you are a
yes,
senior manager, of course, when you go and look at, 20 different teams, it might be confusing if they have different
exactly.
workflow. But
Yeah.
do you actually need to go into that little or
Mm.
detail, or you need to have a little bit more high level
Yeah,
detail and about the work and as you said in portfolio level, right?
yeah,
So this big project or this big feature, whatever, where is that? Okay.
exactly.
In detail, this is team's job, right? So you don't really
Yes,
need that much detail and
yeah,
micro understanding about,
yes,
is this in code review or if is it in testing or whatever like that. Yeah.
yes, you're right. Yeah,
Mm. Yeah, that's good. I also like to talk a little bit about flow,
yeah.
right? And um, I like everyone if they haven't watched Kanban Lens by Andy Carmichael,
Mm,
which I'm gonna put the link in this episode as well. I
mm,
encourage everyone to go and watch that video. It's just 5 minutes video. Andy Carmichael, by the way, he's one of the author of Kanban Essential Contents. He talks about, flow and how we look at work as a flow in
mm,
Kanban, right? So he look
mm.
at the work from Kanban lens, right?
Yes.
So in Kanban, we look at the work as a flow from
Mm,
when or where customer said I need
mm.
something until the customer demands actually fulfilled and customer say, yeah, thank you very much, you solved my problem, I'm very happy, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then this work goes through different stages,
Yes.
right? And now we're talking about knowledge work, right?
Yes.
So at the beginning, we have no idea about the problem
Yeah.
or the demand, right? And then we do a little bit analysis. So we learn a little bit more about this work, right? And then we do a little bit of design. And then, okay, we learn a little bit more about it, right?
Mm,
And then we start coding, right? Then we learn more about it. When we start coding, oh, okay, we made a mistake. We didn't know this might happen. We didn't know the code is that complex or that simple, stuff like that, right? We are going to deploy it. Again, we learn about it. So every stage that this work flow through the system, we learn more about it until
yes.
it goes to the customer and customer say, oh yeah, this is actually what I wanted, or no, this is not what I wanted. Okay, so you
Yes.
completely misunderstood. So I think this 5 minutes video will help everyone to have a little bit better understanding about how to look at the work from Kanban point of
Lens.
view
Yeah.
and what is the purpose of workflow and why do we need this workflow?
Yes. I think
Because there
that's
is a
really good.
reason. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Uh,
No, good one.
one thing that I have learned, and this is something Daniel Krog has said once. Once you see it, you can unsee it, and that's the
Hmm.
power of Kanban. So it's all about understanding, more about the thing that you said, like the Kanban lens, because it's
Mm.
all about customer, right? When we talk about Kanban, when we try to practice Kanban in team level, in organization level, our
Hmm.
focus here is actually customer. How
Hmm.
can we serve our customer better? The service that we are providing, how can we make it better, faster, and keep improving our flow?
Hmm.
So when we look through the Kanban lens, we are actually applying a lot of systems thinking in it, because it's not only understanding our own team, the
Hmm.
work, the component that we are doing in our team, but also understanding things around us, because where the work flows to our team, like what's
Mm.
the source of it, where the work will go, because
Hmm.
at the end, customer is the heart of everything. So this is quite powerful that I thought, like, and I had a really like a aha moment when I
Mm-hmm.
heard it for the first time. That
Mm.
yes, that's right. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it.
On set, yeah. Now that's a good point. So I back to that person's question. So imagine you explain all these things to this person, but this person, she's a senior manager, and she said, no, we have
Mm.
to standardize it, right? Then what do you think we can do to standardize it? Because one way is to go in your tools and have same, column and stages and the workflow. So that's one way of standardizing. But what do you think, based on your experience, might be the right way to standardize it? If it is
That's
a
a
right way, if there is any right way. I'm asking some tricky questions.
It is really a tricky question, I would say. Uh, I have never found that standardizing, the entire organization or the entire product has helped anyone. Um,
Mm,
Again, I would say go back to the why. Why would she want to standardize it? Because if it is only the information she needs to understand where the teams are at, how are they progressing, then you can definitely create a dashboard
hmm.
or a portfolio view or a high level view and then give her access to that. Once she starts getting the data, she start like trusting the people, the team, then you can introduce her to the actual logic that okay, this was achieved because every team could visualize the different stages in their own way to
Mm.
understand better about the system. And so
You know,
like
yeah,
yeah,
sorry. No, no,
no,
no,
go
keep going.
go. No, I was just thinking because this is a really really good question and spot honestly. Just thinking that if she is like after, even though you give her the dashboard and the portfolio level view, she wants to check with every team that if they are using the standardized view like workflow or not.
Hmm.
um, that would be the tricky part,
I
wouldn't
think
it?
the answer is inside the definition of workflow. How
Yeah.
work flow through the system. So
Yes.
if the work flow through the systems, all the systems the same way, then the
Yeah.
workflow will be the same, right?
Well, does it though, like in your
If it goes
situation?
through all the system the same way.
No, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
asking this because like I'm trying to understand. So the situation that we are talking about now, is the work really flowing through the same kind of system or similar kind of system in
No, this is
every
just
team?
a hypothesis. Okay. So I
Okay.
said
Okay.
if the work goes
Yeah.
through the system the same way in all
Yeah.
the systems, then the workflow will be the same.
Yes.
Yes. And
Potentially.
if everyone want to measure the same thing, right, and it goes through the same thing, then it will be the same. Right? But because it's not going through all the systems the same way, so it's
Yes.
impossible to have one unique workflow, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So one thing we can do, right?
Yeah.
Again, hypothesis, right? Imagine we have a very senior manager and say, no, 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 everyone must follow the same workflow.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, if you want to do that, if you want to try your hypothesis, let's try it.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's add all the stages in the workflow the same on all the teams, all the systems, whatever you want,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And then after 6 months or 3 months or whatever, right? Then, when you look at how long the cards or the work stay in each stages of the workflow, for example, if I
Mm.
back to my first example, the first team that had one developer, then you realize that maybe 10% of the work been waiting in code review.
Mm.
Another team, the code review stage in the workflow, it's zero, right? So we haven't spent any time on code review, right?
Mm.
Or the team that has deep, they have CI/CD pipeline and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
So you realize that okay, there is no waiting time for deploy. So when the code is ready and packaged up, it just goes to the ready for test or whatever, or deployed or whatever the
Mm.
stage is, right? The other team had 40%, 20% of the time been waiting for someone else to deploy it, right? Then you can back and say, see, this stage for this team is redundant. They don't need it. It's just
Mm,
extra
yeah,
column. No one actually use it.
yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And then you can say, all right. And then she might say, oh, why this is zero? Why there is no time spent on ready for deployment, but this team has 20% of the time spent on ready for deployment. Why is
Mm,
that? Okay. So, okay, because they don't have CI/CD.
yeah,
If you want to change this 20% to 0%, then invest some time and money, right? Give them some budget or whatever, and then, automate the deployment for them.
mm, yeah.
Otherwise, yes, they spend 20% because this is the reality.
Well, that makes
What
sense.
do you think?
Yeah, that that does make sense. Um, so I'm just trying to point out the takeaway from today's session because we are at time.
Yeah.
Uh, and the first one is that what is workflow? The
First,
definition.
what is work? So
What is
we see work as a flow from
yes,
customer until the customer demands met.
yes,
And then the workflow visualize how this work goes through the system, right?
yes,
Workflow has different stages,
yes,
and different team want to visualize different stages of the workflow because they want to measure different things,
yes,
right? So because it's impossible that work goes through all the system the same way, so it's basically impossible to have all the workflow designed the same way or standardize all the workflow, the same
yes,
way.
yeah,
But if someone want to do it because I have the authority and I force everyone to do it, then we can do that. And after a while, we can look at the result and see what happens, right?
yes. Or find out why does Orod wants to do it. So if we find out he just wants to
Yeah.
understand, where the progress is, how everyone is progressing with the work, then we can definitely try the workaround.
Mm-hmm.
Or else, yes, the one that Orrin mentioned. But also, we need to understand whenever we are talking about workflow in we want to visualize workflow because
Mm-hmm.
we want to improve our system. And this is
Yes.
very much depending on the context of the team.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also another reason why we cannot standardize workflow. So, in order to create a workflow or design a workflow, understanding the context of the team, that why they want to visualize the different stages is very important. So, this is
Mm-hmm.
another recommendation for anyone who is listening to this
Mm-hmm.
episode. Please do not try to create a standardized workflow for all the teams in your organization because that would not help you to achieve the result you want to achieve with Kanban.
Yeah. And my recommendation is to try your hypothesis as always and see if it works or not.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let us know in the comment section or if you can reach out to us that what's
Mm-hmm.
working in your case, and we would love to learn.
Exactly. What do you think about workflow? And have you ever seen the work as a flow from customer to the end, or you have different definition of work and workflow? And as I said, I'm going to put the um, Kanban lens from Andy Carmichael to this episode. So please, everyone, go and watch it. It's a very short and valuable video. Thanks everyone for listening to us today.
Thank you, everyone.